dinner karaoke at a Kairos. So congratulations, K40, you've done it. Another first for Kairos. Well, I'm really excited about talking to you guys a little bit tonight about Jesus. And I'm particularly excited about what God has been doing in you up until this point and what he's got left to do in you for the rest of the evening and the rest of our time here at Kairos. And I really think that as we've talked about the Father's love for us and how he loves you unconditionally, and about how sin and suffering can obscure our ability to see that, that what we're going to talk about tonight and what you're going to experience over the next several days is going to really set a foundation for you, not only for the rest of the school year, but as you go off into college. I really believe that what's happening to you on Kairos is going to drive some pillars in the ground for you that you can look back on and remember years from now when the storms come and when you're in times of difficulty. You know, in Jesus' time, for the Israelites to remember the good things that God had done in your life was to be in relationship with God. As a matter of fact, it was when the Israelites forgot all of the good things that God had done for them that they pulled themselves out of a relationship with God. So they were constantly recounting and recalling the good works that God had done for them. It's the way they kept that relationship fresh. It'd be sort of like you reading love letters that your lover has written to you over and over and over again if he or she is far away, because you want to keep the love fresh. And we have a tendency as human beings to forget. Right? The phrase we use today is, "What have you done for me lately?" Right? You guys have all heard that. And we have to be careful as Christians that we don't become a "what have you done for me lately, God" type of people. But it's easy to fall into. And I see this type of forgetting and remembering happen a lot with seniors and freshmen in college when they leave JSerra. So, for example, how many of you are going to go to a school, you think, out of state? Well, that's almost everybody. Holy cow. Max, you're staying local. You're going to have to make sure you visit these guys so you know what I'm talking about. All right, so you're going to experience this. If you go out of state to college, I guarantee you'll experience what I'm about to say, because every year, students come back and they tell me this story. So just recently, a student came back. She's been away from a couple years, somewhere in the Midwest. I said, "How do you like the school?" He said, "I love the school." "How do you like the Midwest?" She said, "Don't take it personally, Mr. Reidy. She doesn't like the Midwest." And I said, "Well, what is it about the Midwest you don't like?" Of course, I live here now and I've lived there, so I know what it is she doesn't like. She said, "Guys, I feel so landlocked. And I forgot how beautiful the California coast is." And she looked at me and said, "You know what, Mr. Reidy, it's not that I forgot so much, it's that I realized growing up here, I just never really appreciated how much beauty we have." Can anybody relate to that? When you go away, you're going to know exactly what she means. And your appreciation will increase dramatically when you come back for a visit. And this happened to me when I first moved out here. So I taught, my first year here was the school year of 2014, 2015. You guys were 8th grade then, right? Yeah, no, you guys, that was the year before you guys got here. So I taught a senior theology class, and at the end of the class I wanted to do something fun. So I said, who in this class lives closest to the beach? One of the guys raised his hand, and he lived at the Strands. You guys, anybody here live at the Strands? No, so you guys, do you live in there, Parker? In JSerra, you guys live? Yeah. Nice place to live, right? Love it. So we for the last day of class, we went to his house, we got some pizza, and we kind of just talked about the year and how did it go, and it was really more like this kind of hangout, right? And then we went down to the beach, and we took a photo. And at that point, most of the class had left. Maybe 4 or 5 students hung behind, and they were with me walking on the beach, just talking a little bit. And I had only been in California for about 3 months, and I'm at the Strands. It was one of the first beaches I saw. I didn't know Strands from Trussell's, right? So here come the waves coming. I take off my shoes, I roll up my pants, and I'm sure you guys did this as kids. And I'm running through as the water's coming up, just about ankle high, right as the tide's rolling in and out. And I felt like a kid. I was going, "Woo!" And I looked behind me. They're just kind of looking at me and laughing. And I'm going, "Come on, guys." And I run some more, and woo! And I look behind me, and they're still looking at each other, laughing. And come on, guys. So I must have run about 100 yards, and I stopped, and I said, come on, come on, come on. And they were walking far away from the water in the sand with their shoes on. And they came up to me and they said, guys, what are you doing? Like, why don't you have your shoes off? Why aren't you running around? I said, Mr. Reidy, we could do this every day of our life. And I realized right there that I had to make a concerted effort if I wasn't going to start taking what we have for granted. Thought, oh, wow, okay, this is what happens when you grow up with this, isn't it? Eventually, it's just, yeah, it's a scene, I see it every day, and you get used to it. You know what? It's starting to happen to me right now. Like, I used to make sure every night I watched the sunset. The first 3 months I was in California, never missed a sunset. Then it was every other night. Then it got to be about once a month. Now, 2 or 3 or 4 months can go by, I haven't even looked at the water. I said, I'm starting to forget how beautiful God's creation is that surrounds me. It reminds me of a story a friend told me. A buddy of mine, when his son was 6 years old, I called him on the phone. He said, man, you're not going to believe what happened. It was early spring back east. So they've got the change of seasons there. And he said, most of the trees were still barren, and his son was playing out in the yard, and he was inside doing something, and all of a sudden the door slammed open, and his 6-year-old son came running in and said, Dad, come outside, you gotta see this. What's going on? He goes, come on. He grabs his hand and just pulls him out the door. He goes, come on. My friend said, I didn't have any idea what was happening. Was somebody hurt? I didn't know. So he runs, and his 6-year-old son brings him to the middle of the yard, and he said, he pointed down at the ground and said, look, Dad, look, a flower. Remember when you were 6 years old and that really impressed you, right? The first flower of spring had come up, and his 6-year-old kid went bananas. And my friend, being a contemplative guy, he said to me, you know what? When did I stop being in awe of a flower? Something happens to us as we go through life. Life gets more complex. We get filled up with more and more activities in our life. We get filled up with more and more pains in our life. And we start to forget about the beautiful things that are around us. There were some psychologists about 10 years ago who did studies on newborn babies up through about 5 years old. And they were Christian psychologists. And they came up with a theory based on observations they had made. And this is what they theorized. And you can believe it or not, but they said, we believe that newborn babies have an experience of God in the womb that's very intimate and intense. And once we're born and we start to age, we get further and further and further away from that kind of face-to-face experience. And one of the reasons they concluded this was that they heard young people make inferences about this as they were starting to get of speaking age. So this is one of the things that happened. One of the ladies who did the experiment, a doctor, she had 2 daughters. One was 5 and one was a newborn. And one day she was walking by the bedroom door, and her baby was supposed to be taking a nap. And the door was just a little bit of ajar, and she heard some voices, or she heard a voice. And so she said, what's going on? So she kind of propped open the door just a little bit, and she saw her 5-year-old daughter up on the crib and talking to her little sister. And this 5-year-old said to the little sister, hey, quick, tell me what God's like. I'm starting to forget him. I think there's something to this theory. We are all made for God. Some people put it like this. We each have a hole in our heart, and we try to fill it with all kinds of things throughout our lives. Mr. Eckert mentioned a lot of those things earlier today. We self-medicate. We try to fill that hole because it makes us feel empty, and we want to be satisfied. But the hole is shaped like God. Some people say it's shaped like Jesus. And until we try to fill that hole with him, we're never going to be satisfied. One of my friends used to always say, we will never really be happy until God is at the center of our lives. We can try everything else, but until we really take a chance on him and give it all to him, there's always going to be something missing. And what I want to tell you tonight is that I really believe there's only one reason God has created us. There's really only one thing we have to know about God. And if we get this right, everything else in our lives could go so much better. And this is the thing. All he wants to do is pour his love into you. That's why he made us. He just wants to pour his love out into us. And at every moment of the day, that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to get our attention so he can convince us that we are made for love. He just wants to tell us tonight, you are so special. Do you know how much I love you? Do you know how much I just love being with you? There's no one like you. But we forget, and things get in the way, and we lose our capacity to hear him whispering that to us and to see him around us. And the primary reason we lose that capacity is something called sin. Sin is something we're all born with, and it creates in us almost like a marine layer, is what Mr. Eckert just said earlier, right? There's just, we can kind of taste God, we can get a sense of him, but there's like a fog between us and him, and we just can't get to him as much as we'd like to. An analogy that I like to use that helps me is this. Have any of you ever driven a car that kind of has a pull to the left or the right? You know what I'm talking about? Okay, right? So what do you have to do when you're in a car like that? Yeah, you got to adjust. You got to overcompensate. You're constantly recalibrating, right? You can't just let the wheel go. You've always got to be attentive. That's sort of what like sin has done with us and our souls. We're kind of just off a little bit. We're always being pulled to the left or to the right, and we need to recalibrate. The classic teaching on sin is that it does three things to us. First, it dims our intellect. Secondly, it weakens our will. And third, it excites our passions. So what does that mean? Sin dims our intellect. Because we've sinned, it's really hard now to know what's true. Isn't it? I mean, look at the world we live in today. I mean, every religion professes to be true. And is it easy to know which one's really true? It's pretty confusing, isn't it? I think it's confusing. And as a young person, it's got to be more confusing. Or think about the times you've sat in a theology class, or just listen to your parents talk to you about right and wrong, and how many times you've thought to yourself, I just don't know if I believe that, or I'm not convinced yet. Has anybody had that experience? Right? Sin dims our intellect. It makes it hard to know what's really true, what's really good, what's really right. So that's that first way that the car kind of pulls to the right or to the left. The second thing it does is it weakens our will. What does that mean? So even when we do know what's good and right, it's really hard sometimes to choose it, isn't it? Like all of us can probably think of a time recently where maybe our mom and our dad has said something to us, and we know we want to respond in a way that's peaceful and loving. We've told ourselves 100 times, I don't want to talk back to them, and what happens? We talk back to them anyway, right? Or we don't want to fight with our little brothers and sisters, and we do it. Or we don't want to cheat on the test, and we do it. Or whatever the situation is. So because of sin, even when we know what's right, we're weak. We can't always choose it. The car is pulling us to the left or the right. And then finally, our passions are super fueled. So our passions override our reason. And we get in situations and they just take over. And this happens particularly in the area of chastity, right? We may want to be more chaste in our relationships, but then we see that person, or we're next to that person, and we can't control our passions the way we want to. Sin has caused us to be pulled to the left or the right in our very souls. The good news is this, and this is what I want to talk to you about for the rest of the evening. We don't have to right the car ourselves. Matter of fact, we can. Just recalibrating with the steering wheel, does that make the car go straight all on its own? No, it's not enough. And guys, we cannot overcome our sin on our own. But here's the good news of the gospel. God, knowing this and loving us so much, has decided to come here himself to recalibrate us. He's come in the person of Jesus Christ to undo the sin that has us trapped and that won't let us live the life we know we really want to live. That's the good news of Jesus. And the really good news is he's here right now. He's here with us tonight, and he wants to do this for us tonight. And the thing that really amazes me about this plan of God, that he knows because of our sin we can't get completely calibrated, is that he not only came to right this wrong himself, but the way he did it is absolutely mind-boggling. He did it by dying on a cross. Now, I'm going to be totally honest with you. Wish I had a bigger cross, sorry. Wouldn't fit my pocket. Yes, but I want him on it, right? Okay. So, I got to be honest with you. It's really hard for me to get my mind around this. Why did he have to die on a cross? He could have chosen to save us any way he wanted to, but this is how he decided to do it. And so for me, it's helpful to do a couple things. One, it's helpful for me to think of real-life examples of people who have lived like Jesus did, so I can say, wow, okay, yeah, that's what it means in a way to kind of die on a cross. And it's helpful for me then to realize that Jesus did this for me. So I want to give you 3 examples of people who have made a sacrifice like this. To maybe we just get our minds around what it means when Jesus dies for us on the cross. So the first one's a story you may have heard before. It's a story of a man named Saint Maximilian Kolbe. Anybody know his story? All right. So Saint Maximilian Kolbe was a Catholic priest living in Poland at the time that the Nazi occupation started. And he was watching all kinds of Jewish men and women being brought into concentration camps. And at a certain point, the Nazis started rounding up not only Jewish men and women, but also Catholics, and among them priests. So Father Maximilian was a very outspoken, a very dynamic priest. And they wanted to shut that down, so they brought him to Auschwitz. Now, there was a rule in Auschwitz, and the rule was, if anyone ever escaped, they would pick 10 people at random and kill them on the spot, or in some cases, torture them and then kill them. And the reason they did that was so people wouldn't escape. So they had this threat hanging over the whole camp. And during Maximilian Kolbe's stay in the prison, a man escaped. And so the alarm went out, they did a search for this guy, they couldn't find him, so they rounded up all the prisoners in that cell block. And they put him outside, and they said, if we're going to give you a chance to tell us where this man went and who knows about the escape plan, and if you know, come forward now, and no one came forward. So they picked, yes?
I have a question.
Yes?
Would they do that if they found the person escaped?
Some people speculate that they might have killed 10 people anyway, just to teach them a lesson, because they were so cruel, right? But in this case, nobody knew about it. So they started naming random names for people they were going to put to death. And they called one name at a time, and they had the men, this was all men, they had the men step forward, and they got to about the 6th name. And now, it's hard for us to imagine this, right? You're already in a concentration camp, you're pretty sure you're going to die, and now your name's called out, you know you're going to get shot probably in the next 20 minutes. And this man got his name called, and he went into hysterics, which isn't surprising. And he started sobbing and screaming and pleading for his life. And he dropped to his knees and he said, please, I have a family, I have a wife, I have 6 kids, please, 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 I beg of you, don't do this, don't do this. And of course, they said, shut up, I don't care. And all the other prisoners are watching this. And right about the time they were dragging him to the front of the line, Maximilian Kolbe stepped up and said, take me, I'll go in his place. And the guards didn't care who died, they just wanted 10 people. So they looked at each other and said, it's fine with us, priest, come on. And they threw the sobbing man back into the group, and they took Maximilian Kolbe. But because he was so courageous and because he was a priest, instead of shooting him, they put him in a torture chamber, and they starved him to death. So if you go to a museum and you see photos and images of Maximilian Kolbe, by the end of his life, he was absolutely emaciated. He was just skin and bone, basically. But the entire time, he remained at peace. And he was so close to God that he didn't starve to death. Matter of fact, eventually they went in and they just gave him a lethal injection because they said, this guy won't die. All right, so that was Maximilian Kolbe. It's kind of hard to believe, isn't it? I mean, sometimes I put myself in that position. I think, wow, what would I do? Would I have the courage to step up like that? He gave his life completely for an innocent stranger. That's a lot like what Jesus has done for us. All right, second story. When I was young, I think I was about 12 or 13 years old, came into the living room one day, and my mom, she was visibly upset. She looked like she had been crying, but she had kind of heard me coming and wiped her tears. You know, have you ever experienced that? But you thought, okay, you look like you've been crying. And I said, Ma, is anything wrong? And she said, well, she had a very good friend whose little daughter, had just been diagnosed with a fatal illness. So she told me, you know, I want you to say a prayer for Mrs. So-and-so because her daughter just got diagnosed with a serious illness and they're not sure she's going to make it. And I said, oh, I'm sorry, Mom, I'll pray. And then my mom looked at me and said something to me that just totally changed the way I looked at her for the rest of my life. And she said this, she said, if you or one of your sisters had a disease like this, she said, I would pray to God every day that he would give that disease to me and take it away from you. I remember thinking, wow, I don't even know how to respond to that, right? And I've thought about that a long time, for many, many years. I imagine that there are many moms who feel that way. I don't know that my mom's that exceptional in that regard. Because I think that when I reflect on it, when you love someone, when you really love someone, you can't bear to see them in pain. Isn't that true? I mean, doesn't it hurt you to see someone you love in pain? And when you really love, with an unconditional love like a mom does, I think you would be able to say, God, I give that to me so that the person I love doesn't have to suffer. That's how Jesus feels about you and me. He looks at us when we're in pain, and he can't bear to see us suffer. And it's so unbearable to him that he says, I am going to come and I'm going to die on a cross so that I can take on all of your pain and I can eliminate it for good. It's not going to happen immediately, but when you die, you are not really going to be dead. I'm going to raise you to eternal life, and you will never experience pain again. I have one more story that I think illustrates this type of Christ-like love. So there's another friend of mine recounting this to me. A friend of mine has a really, really good friend who grew up in like a middle of California, and there were 7 brothers, and they grew up on a farm. So throughout the summers, that all of the brothers would help their dad on the farm. They'd walk out every morning from the house, they'd go out on the farm, and they'd spend all day with him. And the youngest brother had, I think it was cerebral palsy. He was developmentally disabled, and pretty severely. So the older 6 brothers would do a lot of work with their dad, but the younger brother, it was almost a token of appreciation, right? He'd kind of tag along, and they'd give him little things to do, and that was kind of it. So this had been going on for years and years and years. And one summer, one day, they're going out to the fields, and as usual, the youngest brother, because he was a little bit slower physically, he was trailing behind them. Well, it had been an exceptionally cold and dry winter, and on their farm, they had a big area which had a door, and it was built into it was a cesspool. Everybody knows what a cesspool is, right? A cesspool is when you live outside from the city, usually there's some type of well that your toilet drainage goes into. Okay, so it's when you go to the bathroom, We have sewer systems here. They would have just a big well on their property. And every 20 or 30 years, you have to get it cleaned out. So there was a door over it. And they had straw on top of the door. Well, it had gotten so dry that winter that the wood on the door was starting to get fragile. So that day, everybody was walking into the field, and the younger brother walked on top of that straw and fell into the cesspool. So the dad was the last one behind. He was maybe 30 yards ahead, and he kind of heard faint screaming. He looked and he didn't see his son, so he ran, and he looked down and he saw his son, and because of his disease, his illness, he couldn't swim. So he saw his son sinking in a cesspool. So he grabbed the first thing he could, I think it was a rope or a pole, and he tried to lower it down to the kid so the kid could grab on, but it wasn't working. And meanwhile, he had his sons call 911. But that was going to take 5 or 10 minutes. So realizing that his son was drowning, his dad jumped into the cesspool and took his son and put him on his shoulders and started treading, well, it wasn't really water, right? But he was treading sewage with his son on his shoulders, hoping that the paramedics could get there in time so they could pull him out of there. And 3, 4, 5 minutes went by. When the paramedics got there, they put down something for him to grab. And when the son grabbed it and pulled himself up, the dad, from exhaustion, couldn't tread water anymore, for lack of a better term, and sunk down in the cesspool and drowned. Now, I don't think there's a single person in the world who hears that story and A, doesn't recognize how tragic it is, but B, doesn't recognize how heroic it is, right? And I don't know any dad who wouldn't do that for a son. And I tell you guys these stories not to make us sad, but because they're absolutely, I think, illuminating examples of the type of love that human beings can have for each other. Self-sacrificial love that can only come from a God who is pure love. This is what Jesus does for us on a cross. He says, you mean more to me than you could ever know. I would jump into a cesspool for you. I take your place. I give my life for you. The reason Catholics keep Jesus on the cross, even though he's risen, is so that we can be reminded every day of what real love looks like. Because this was not an easy death. This was a death of torture. Have you guys ever stepped on a tack? Right? Jesus had nails, not tacks, driven through his wrists, not his hands, and through his feet so he could hang on that cross. And he was tortured to death. He was asphyxiated. A lot of people think he died with the lance in his wound, but the purpose was hanging there, eventually, for 3 hours, you couldn't breathe anymore. You died of asphyxiation. So he basically suffocated to death. And he would do that again for you and for me. And if you were the only person who ever lived, Jesus loves you so much that he would do that for you. He would do that for you every time. And what he was doing spiritually on that cross was he was reaching out his arms all the way to the east, back into history, to the beginning of time, and all the way to the west into the future. And he was pulling into himself every pain, every suffering, every sin that had ever been committed, and every one that would ever be endured. And he brought him into himself, and he put all of that to death. He dunked it and put it to death so he could raise us all up to new life. On the cross, Jesus knew that you would be sitting here tonight. And on the cross, he knew you'd be at JSerra. On the cross, he knew that you would have gotten in a fight with your boyfriend or girlfriend last week and your mom and dad last month. You would have made that bad decision the other day. And he took all of that, guys. He took you to himself and brought you into his death so you can be raised from the dead. Now, that's still kind of amazing to get your mind around, isn't it? You guys have all seen The Passion, haven't you? So my favorite scene, I think is everybody's favorite scene in the Passion, is this. Tell me if you remember this one. So he just got the cross, and he's walking through the cobblestone streets. And all of a sudden they show St. John with his mom. His mom wants to see him. So St. John kind of takes him through the back alleys so she can get to a place where he knows he'll be passing by. You guys remember this scene? And Jesus comes by, and they kick him, and he falls, and he hits his face on the ground. And there's this flashback in Mary's head of when he was a boy, and he was running, and he falls, and she goes running to him like a good mom and says, I'm here, it's okay. You guys remember this? So she runs to him and goes to him and picks him up and says, I'm here. Incredible scene. He looks at his mom and he doesn't say, thank you, Mom, I'm in so much pain. Please pray for me. He looks at her and he says, does anybody know what he says? Remember what he says?
Like be gone or something like that?
No, but he does say that in another moment. Be gone with you. No, but he says, Mother, behold, I make all things new. What a weird thing to say at that moment, right? Like, what is he talking about? Well, what he's talking about is this. Jesus was going to the cross knowing exactly what he was doing. He was going to the cross for you and me so he could make us new, so he could save us from this pull that we so much want to be good. We so much want to be the persons God created us to be, but we can't. We try, we can't. And he said, I'm going to the cross so you don't have to do it. I can do it. Give it to me and I'll do it. And if you're having a hard time understanding this, he's put into creation little symbols of this. So just think about it. The redwood trees up in Northern California that grow hundreds of feet high, how do they start out?
A seed.
Incredible. They started as a seed, right? And you put the seed in the ground and it dies. And after it dies, boom, what happens? It grows to hundreds of feet, like a resurrection. And a caterpillar goes into a cocoon, and it dies, and what happens? Boom, it comes out, and it flies. And it's transformed into something totally new, a new creation. That's what the death on the cross does for us. It wasn't nails that kept Jesus hanging on that tree. It was his love for you and me. That's why Jesus was on the tree. He could have gotten down anytime he wanted to, but he said, I love you this much. I would do anything so that you could understand how much I love you. So